It's important to know what to do against every gambit and every weird, unusual openings. One of them is this one, starts with g4. It's called the Grob, and now black continues with d5. White plays the bishop in g2 and starts applying pressure towards this diagonal. Black needs to take the pawn now. And now the move to continue for white is c4. So the idea here is simple. Put more pressure over d5, and then queen b3 with the idea of trapping the rook in b7. I've personally fallen many times for this trap back when I didn't know what to do against it. Black just needs to stay calm and play c6 now, supporting these the square d5. So now white continues with queen b3. Also, another possibility is to take the pawn. We're going to look at that later. Queen b3. No reason to panic. No reason to go and defend the b7 pawn, because black needs to prioritize development. Black simply plays e6, creating a chain of pawns here in the center, and after queen takes b7, it looks like, well, the rook is not trapped, because clearly you know that you can move the knight to d7, but it looks like white's ahead in initiative and material as well. But this is all just fine. Let's have a look at a few ideas. Let's start with queen takes c6. It looks like white is okay, grabbing pawns, but then rook to c8. Black is continuing development. And after queen goes either to a6 or a4, let's say a6, rook c4 comes with an attack on the bishop. Two main ideas now. We're going to look at knight c3 and knight a3 in order to save the bishop. Let's start with knight a3 attacking the rook. Black continues with thematic rook to b4. The idea is to go to b6 to attack the queen. The queen will have to take the pawn or go back to a4, whatever. Black will continue with development. And black has saved himself from the trap of the grub. He's done a pawn, but so much more ahead in development. So white will have to go with development now. So let's say d3 or b3. Let's say, for instance, b3 to put the bishop on a good-looking diagonal. Rook to b6, and after queen takes a7, you can say that white has achieved something like, like grabbing a lot of material. But the trap has faded. Black didn't lose the game, lost a little bit of material, but that comes with the advantage of something like -4 at the moment. And you can tell why. Now black continues with knight g to f6. And after the bishop develops, finally, black plays bishop to c5. With some sort of an attack on the queen, because now black is threatening rook takes pawn in b3 with an attack on the bishop, and the discovered attack on the queen. The bishop is protected by the knight. So after queen only move, which is basically going back to a4, in order to stop all of this from happening, black will simply castle. So what makes black have so much advantage? Black has developed literally every piece, well, except this rook will have to come on an open file at some point, and the queen is capable of reaching the open file anytime it wants to. White hasn't castled and hasn't developed the knight, and white also cannot develop the knight. Not a square that makes sense though, and also black has an attack on f2. So here now we've learned how to survive the grub and how to be much ahead in the initiative and in the development. So there's just too many things that white can do. We're not going to be able to cover all the possible lines because we're just far away from the theory now. d3, maybe e3 or knight h3. Many of these moves are possible, so we're not going to be able to cover them, but let's have a look at the ideas. Rook to b4, attacking the queen, and sacrificing f2 is thematic. So let's look at this very natural looking move, which is knight f3, reaching some potentially like some natural squares, also with the idea of white castling, because white is not going to be able to castle without moving this knight, and castling this side is a suicide. So after knight f3, black continues rook to b4, attacking the queen. The queen will have to pick the only square, which is a6, and now black can take the pawn and win a crucial pawn, misplace the king. If the king takes knight e4 check, after the king moves back, black continues with knight to c5, attacking the queen, and the queen can't really move anywhere except b7, but then rook to b7. So let's make a recap. g4, d5, and bishop g2, we take the side pawn, and we're not really giving the central pawn because the queen is protecting it. So after c4 thematic move, we play c6. And after queen b3, we ignore the pawn in b7, we just play e6. Queen takes b7, and knight moves. We're going for development. After queen takes pawn, rook c8, and when the queen moves away, we're going to take the pawn in c4. Queen a6 would be recommendable instead of c4 because this will come with a tempo. A4 will come with a tempo, black winning a tempo. So after queen a6, the rook takes the pawn. And we looked at knight to a3, general ideas. What happens after knight to c3? Needless to mention that the knight is the only one that should be moving now, because basically d3 or b3 will come with the rook simply winning the bishop. And the king d1 is completely wrong, because then the king is getting misplaced, and black will continue with the same plan as before. Rook to b4, idea of reaching rook to b6, in the future knight c5, same structure basically, knight to f6, and so on. So let's look at knight c3 because it looks like really natural, and it is better than king d1. Black continues now with queen to c7, applying more pressure over c3, also stopping white from playing moves like d3 or b3. Why is that? Well, d3 for example looks natural, maybe development of the bishop, but then rook takes, and then after pawn takes back, then queen takes, we have a fork. So in this position, after knight c3, queen to c7, b3 will be met by the same idea. You can win a free knight. So what can white do? Let's go on for a move. Let's remember that we're applying pressure on the bishop. So the knight can't really move, because then rook and queen will be going to the back rank together and winning the game. A move like h3 is met by bishop to h5. The bishop will have to keep controlling this diagonal, because it will be crucial to capture the knight in f3 whenever that happens. And the bishop also is staying on this diagonal because g4 move can never happen again, so the bishop is there to stay. A move like knight f3, we will just take it. That does allow white to continue the game with the bishop pair, and also the white play to castle and maybe find some tranquility. But what happens now? Well, bishop takes back in order to keep the pawn structure safe, because it's already not very good looking. And now black plays d3. Also, the bishop needs to remain strong, because putting the pawn in f3 will make this bishop in g2 even worse. So after d4 attacking the knight, we still have a double attack on the pawns, on the bishop in c1, and now black is just winning. So this is even white playing the best moves, find black winning, because the Grob is not supposed to be a winning opening. The white knight is now taken because he just cannot move anymore. The best move though by white is d3. Engine suggests this move because now we don't have the rook takes move anymore, because rook takes knight, pawn takes back, queen takes back. Let's look at it. Right, this doesn't work simply because, remember, when the white bishop is on this diagonal and it's controlling every square, unlike before when we had a pawn in d5, now this doesn't work. So after king d1, for example, and queen taking rook, now the queen can reach c8 and it will have the support of the bishop. And this is going to be a problem, because after moving the king, then the bishop can come in the attack. This doesn't mean like that the white player will win this game. The evaluation of the engine here is about 0. White is putting a lot of pressure on the black player, preventing the development of the pieces, and white will have to, black will also have to be careful to threats like king moving and then the bishop going to b2. Well, in the future going to a3. That will be a threat. So yeah, everything can happen now, but the computer evaluates this like black is no longer winning because he gave up too much strong initiative to the white player. Back in this position, d4 attacks the knight, and after the move like d3, the best move, black very quietly brings the rook back to c5, still threatening to win the knight, and it will win the knight. White's best move according to the engine again will be a3, with some sort of idea of b4, b5, maybe to counterattack and using a majority against a minority, which makes sense if you think about it. But black simply takes the knight. And yeah, b4 is met by rook to f5, and we're going to end the line here. Black is up a piece. There is no compensation for white. So let's look at this other position. After bishop g2, we take the pawn c4, c6, and then queen b3, e6. We give away the pawn in b7, and now knight d7. What happens if white doesn't want to give black any sort of initiative, with rook to c8 attacking the queen and then reaching c4 with putting pressure on the bishop, and just play something like knight to f3? Just a normal developing move. Well, black will go on with rook to c8 anyway, developing. So let's see how we are going to be targeting the king in case he castles. Let's not forget that white, by playing the Grob, white plays g4, and then the idea of queen b3 and putting pressure on b7 is just a silly opening for beginners who want to trap and win the game quickly. And the thing is, if white is compromised both the king side and the queen side, he can't really castle anywhere safe. If white castles short side, black will simply take the knight. And after bishop takes back, black plays this incredible bishop in d6, having full control over this diagonal. And the game is basically already compromised. The white player has to be very careful to this threat. Right now, the white bishop, this is a pattern to remember. The white bishop in fianchetto is no longer in fianchetto, so queen h4 is a threat. Like if queen takes the pawn in a7, for instance, queen to h4 ends the game. There's no way, no defense. If the bishop goes back to g2 in order to put more protection over the king and prepare a release of the square f4, black plays knight to c5 attacking the queen. The queen will have to move. Instead of a7, this time we're going to pick queen to b4. After taking the pawn, potentially the queen might hope into joining the queen side and the king side and maybe help. But whatever, any move will have lost anyway. Black now plays knight to d3. Well, you know, it comes with an attack on the queen, but even if we hadn't picked the square queen to b4, after the attack of the knight from c5 to the queen, if the queen goes, for example, to a7, then simply rook a8, and the game is over. So that's why we picked queen to b4. Anyway, knight to d3, attack on the queen by the bishop and by the knight, and after the queen moves, wherever she wants to move, doesn't matter too much. Let's say queen c3 to keep an eye on the knight. Still, queen h4 is coming, and there's an attack, deadly attack on h2. So what happens after f4? Looks like that was the move that was going to be played in order to delay the attack on h2. Knight takes in f4, the threat of playing knight e2 immediately and go for queen h2. Black will have to sacrifice a lot of material, but even then, rook takes bishop, knight for example, is met by bishop takes. Well, let's quickly mention that h3 doesn't work because of queen to e1 check. King can't move anywhere, so he has to block with the bishop. And now black plays knight f6, ready to reach the square to attack the queen, and the queen will not be able to move away from this c3 square, because the queen will be able to win the bishop in c1 for free. So if the queen moves away to protect the weak squares around the king and maybe to attack the bishop, still we're going to be able to take the bishop and trap the rook afterwards. So in this position, after queen to h3, well, h3 and queen h3 don't work for the same reason. Queen e1 just wins the bishop for free in this case. Let's repeat it one more time very quickly. We're looking at the variation where white just plays knight to f3 in order to try and castle, and white doesn't go for the queen takes pawn in c6, with allowing black the initiative, or too much initiative basically. Rook to c8 comes anyway, and after castling, black swaps the knight in f3. So after bishop to d6, we are putting more attack over the square h2. What happens if white plays the very best move, which is d4? This allows the bishop to come into the game, the dark square bishop. Black now plays rook to c7 with an attack on the queen, and the queen will have to move away. So let's have a look at this move, which is also the one that gives white most chances. The queen is going into the territory of the king side in order to try and give more defense to his own king. Black plays queen to h4 with the same threat of going to h2. And now let's have a look at this idea, which is rook to d1. Best move by the engine right now. This will allow the king an escape in case of the infiltration of the queen. Black continues very quietly with knight g2 f6. The idea is to play g5, g4. And also potentially if the bishop moves, knight g4 will be reachable with potential queen bishop also supporting the square, the attack on the square h2. Even if the queen were to come into the queen side, we will have just so many pieces attacking h2. So after h3, black continues with g4. And also the idea of playing rook to g8. White's best defensive move now is bishop to g2. Well, needless to say that white has no attacking moves. Bishop to g2, and now black continues rook to g8, still with the idea of sacrificing, well, not sacrificing, swapping the pawns and the rook, making the rook play. There's no way that white can possibly start any sort of attack. The knight will always be guarding the square b8, and black will also have potential ideas of playing h5 at g4. The move f3 here seems to be putting more defense over g4, but it's terribly weak, and it will allow too much control of the black player over the dark squares. So after c5 attacking the bishop, looks like white is trying to remove this bishop from the attack, either by letting it go back or by getting it forcefully swapped. That's not a problem. Bishop now plays to f4 is the best move. And now there's two ideas, either a swap or pawn attacking the bishop, which seems to trap it. So e3 looks like it traps the bishop, but actually now black is completely winning after g4. This e3 move is cutting the queen away from the defense of the king side, so after the pawn takes the bishop, we're going to take in h3, and the bishop is pinned, and yeah. If instead the bishop just swaps, black recaptures. And again, black is completely winning here. King h2 here looks like a thematic type of move where the rook is joining the game and the bishop is no longer pinned, but this loses immediately to knight g4. The knight will eventually, goes back, the knight will eventually reach the square f2. If the king goes back anyway, there's queen to f2, all those are possibility. So if white plays the best move, which would be knight to d2, still black goes on with the best move, which is e5. The idea to storm the pawns, e4, f3, these are all possible ideas. Because the knight will never be able to go to f3, and neither will the bishop. In fact, knight going to f3 or bishop going to f3 will allow the black player to just take the pawn in h3. And the position is completely winning for black. Let's have a look at one more line. After bishop g2 takes, c4, c6, queen by b3, attacking the pawn, e6. White can try this idea, pawn takes. And now black has to take with the e pawn. So now the idea behind it is that after queen to b7, the bishop is kind of stronger, but that's basically it. Knight d7, nothing really changes because now knight plays to d7, and here the queen cannot take the pawn in c6 because rook c8 wins the game immediately. There's a skewer, and white best move will be knight to c3, met by the thematic rook to c8. Again, best move is d4 now for white. The idea is to finally be able to find a scenario where this bishop can be developed. Black now plays bishop to d6, that's the best move, and prepares the usual knight f6, potentially even knight to e7, depending on how the game goes, and castling. Black is just fine. Remember, the most important thing against the Grob is that basically the white player will have nowhere safe the castle. So as long as you survive the opening, then you'll be fine. The most aggressive response by white, we're going to look at this kind of thematic move, is e4, which is typical in these kind of games. e4 here, trying to break the center and bring white pieces into more active squares. Black now plays knight to e7, putting more defense over the square. d5, this is one of occasions where the knight goes to e7 because knight to f6 would be met by a fork. So knight to e7. And now e5 looks interesting, but it's wrong because bishop to c7. And now the black player will be able to reach the square b6 to the bishop, and the bishop will be just amazingly placed due also to the pressure on d4. So let's just have a look at these two ideas anyway, e5 and pawn takes. So after e5 and bishop to c7, again, the white player can't really develop. Imagine the bishop, like the knight playing a normal move like knight to f3. Black will play bishop to b6, putting more pressure over the square d4. And now, if white castles, then simply bishop takes knight, and then these two pawns are falling apart. So that's not possible. And if instead of castling, white first defends the pawn in d4 with the bishop, looks like normal development. Now black plays knight to b8, which was part of the idea of playing bishop to b6, also to blockade the queen. The queen can't escape the queen side now, and the knight's protecting a6. And there's nothing that white can do to stop this from happening. And the next moves will be rook to c7. Well, there's nothing that white can do. Like next moves will be rook to c7, and after the queen goes back, a6, with the rook trapping the queen in a7. This cannot be avoided anymore. Back at this position, move e5, it just creates a chain of pawn that where the most backward pawn is targetable. It's not defended by another pawn, so it's too weak. After the recommended move pawn takes, black plays knight to b6 anyway. And again, the position here is evaluated like black is like up a piece. Development is so much better, and white king is never going to be really safe. Next move by black will be castling. So regardless, basically, let's have a look at the most aggressive variation by white, and also the best attacking move will be pawn takes in c6. White is also reconnecting the pawn and winning more material. Black will just castle. That's the best move. Again, let's remember the weaknesses and the fact that white can't really castle. Let's look at two main ideas now, h3 and knight to f3. They seem to be making sense. Knight f3 will be simply met by knight takes the pawn back. The idea of playing rook to e8, if black were to play again now, play rook to e8 would be completely over for white. So after white does a normal move like castling, we can take the knight. And the bishop takes is met by queen to h4 in the same theme we've seen before. So here, as we notice, knight f3 is just not good enough. After h3, instead, black can play bishop to f5. The idea is to prevent the white player from castling at all. So, for example, knight f3 will be met by, this is the best move, bishop to d3. And also important to notice that the bishop is attacking a6. So any other move by the white player now, if white doesn't play carefully, well, the queen is trapped anyway, like a move like bishop to g5 or whatever else, rook to c7 wins the queen. So knight f3 is not possible, which means that the white player is still not going to be able to castle. And last idea, let's look at knight to e2. Looks like also like a normal move. The knight is protected by the knight, so it doesn't have to worry about getting attacked. Black continues with knight to c6, and the same idea of playing bishop to d3 and go for trapping the queen. And also this is inevitable, although white can win a little bit more material before losing the queen. So if white castles, then bishop to d3, same idea, the bishop's cutting off the square, and it's just that unlike before where there was a white pawn on c6, in this case the queen can maybe take the knight and reduce the material loss. And instead, if white thinks of winning the knight in c6, then this clearly fails to the simple fork rook to c7.